everyone, and welcome back to Getting Started with World Creator 2. In today's episode, we will be going over how to use and understand the path and shape filters. So let's get started. First up, we're going to cover the path filter. So the first thing we're going to do is going to go to Filter, Add Layer, add another filter, or add filters. We're going to go over to Design, and there's our path filter, and as well as our shape filter. So we're going to start off with a path, click OK. And let's just go ahead and change the name of our layer here so we could organize ourselves later on in the video. So I'm going to change this just to path test to make it a little easier. Now, in order to add an actual path to the surface, we need to select Add Path under the filter properties, since the path right up here is just specifying the filter. So to design each individual path, you need to obviously add path here. And then to begin placing the path nodes on our surface, down here at the bottom, you see Edit Path. We're going to hit Edit Path. And now it brings up a few bits of information on how to add, insert, or remove a node. So as the guide here says, we're going to use left shift plus the left mouse click to add our first node. So let's go over here and zoom in and do that now. So left shift plus left click. This adds our very first node. Now, to actually give our path some context, we need obviously some more nodes. So let's go ahead and add one more. So left shift and left mouse click. Okay, so the two orange spheres we have right here and right here is representing the nodes in our spline that is created. Each node can be selected and moved around as so. So if I click and hold, we can move this node around, or click and hold this node, and we can move this end of the path around as we see fit. Each node also has 4 other points of control. The top and bottom control the node's z-axis, or the vertical position, in relation to the terrain. So if I click on the top or bottom arrows, you see they both highlighted in red as well. We could drag up, increases the z-axis of that node, or drag down and it decreases the z-axis of that node. Let's put it back here. As well as the left and right arrow controls, it controls how wide this path is at this particular node. So if I click this arrow and drag outward, we are increasing the width of the path at that specific node. So each node you can control independently. So if I go over here and increase this path's node, you can see that it increases just this portion and not this portion, and it blends the two together nice evenly. So I'm going to go ahead and decrease these back. Now I'm trying to make this node smaller, and you see it won't let me do this. This is because under our properties panel right over here, our width is set by default to 50 or 50 meters. The custom width that you specify with these arrows cannot be any lower than what this width value is over here. So keep in mind that the properties panel on the right takes priority over the minimum width value of your path. So if you want the best custom control over your path's width, set the minimum width value smaller to something like 1 or even 0.1, so you have total control on the full width of your path. Just don't set it to 0, as your path may completely disappear and you might have to start on over. And right now, if you aren't sure as to the width of your custom node is, you can always exit the path. So by hit Done, Edit Path. And you can measure the width of this path by using the same controls as if you were to add a node. So left shift on this side, you can see it adds some information, and left shift on this side, and you can see the distance of this full paths at this point is 85.9 meters. So keep in mind that you could do this at any point in time, anywhere on the terrain. You just can't be in some type of edit mode, such as editing a path or editing a height map or blend map. You have to be out of those two, or of those type windows. Let's go ahead and add a third and fourth node to go over our next part here. So I'm going to zoom around, left shift click, and left shift click over here. So when you place a new node, the node will be placed not only where your cursor is in the X and Y coordinates of the terrain, but it also locks or snaps the node in the Z direction as well. Let's add a fifth node to really describe what I'm saying here. So let's zoom out and add our fifth node at the top. So if we move a node after it is placed, that node will stay locked to the z value that you originally placed it at. So we move this node at the top of the mountain, and you have noticed that it stays the exact same z value the entire time. So only by selecting the top and bottom arrow after you place a node can you then increase or decrease its z value. So keep that in mind if you're wanting to create roads or rivers, that where you click on the terrain makes a big difference in the starting point of that node. So the next thing I'm sure some of you may have noticed is that the path is now more comparable to a spline type line, which is something similar to a spline line in Illustrator or AutoCAD, where it takes all the nodes in consideration and smooths the connection between them. But what if you want a straight line from node to node, similar to actions of a polyline? Well, to do that, we need to add more nodes within the line, similar to making a smooth yet sharp edge in a 3D modeling program like Blender or 3ds Max, where you want the edge of a box, for example, to not be perfectly sharp, but have a little slight bezel to it, but still appear sharp when it renders. Let's add some more nodes to show you my point. So what we want to do is we want this node right here to be almost a perfect 90 degree. So what we need to do is insert another node between this node and another node between this node and this node, so that we can have a much tighter curve. So to place a new node here, we are going to left control click this node. And to place a node here, we're going to left control click this node. Adding a new node will always place itself in the middle between two nodes, and it will also adjust its width to be whatever the width of the path is at the location it was added. So to explain what we did, adding a new node within a path will always place the node after a node in the line of the sequence. So since we played this node first and this node second, if we wanted to put a node on this line, we always have to select this node. Or like we did if we wanted to place this node here, we always have to select the first node. That's why over here this text says insert after. So keep that in mind, and also keep in mind the start and end path of your path. Always know that we started here and ended here, so you could keep in mind exactly where you're adding new nodes. So to make our edge here sharper, we need to drag this node and this node slightly closer to the center node so that the spline can adjust for a much sharper angle. And remember, depending on where you click to add the new node, you may have to adjust the z values of the two new nodes to match more closely to the central node here. Let's go ahead and make these adjustments real quick. So I'm going to pull this node closer, as well as this node. And you can see this artifact effect happening here. That all has to do with the width of our node, as well as how close these are to each other. So you're going to have to do a little give and take. Let's change our width to something like 15. Let's go ahead and widen this just a tad. And then bring them ever so slightly closer. The sharpness of this also has an effect on the neighboring nodes here and here. So if you want this to be even more smooth, just go ahead and add another node outside of these two new nodes we've placed. So I'm going to control click here, and I'm going to adjust these also a little bit closer. So whenever we change this node or whenever we change this node, these three nodes could be locked in place because these two nodes in between are kind of holding this edge. Okay, so now we have a much sharper angle than we had before. Let's now go ahead and run down some of our properties over here on the right real fast. First up, we have the height offset, which adjusts the entire path across the z-axis. So this will be useful in doing roads or rivers when you want the road to be slightly above the ground or the river to be slightly below the ground. So if we decrease this, you can see the whole path is decreasing, or if we increase it, you can see the entire path increasing. It's pretty self-explanatory. We're going to set this back to 0. Then we have the strength setting, which determines how much the path affects the underlying terrain, of course. So if we decrease this from 90, You can see the effect of the path is becoming less and less, or more and more. This is pretty self-explanatory between all filters that we've done in the past. The width setting, as we've gone over before, controls the minimum width of the entire path. The smoothness slider is like the border blending of the edge of the path. Pretty much similar to how we adjusted the border blending of our areas. This lets you adjust how smooth it is from the center of the path to the border of the path. Let's go ahead and decrease this. And there is not any smoothness whatsoever, and you can see how sharp the edge of this path is. Or if we make it entirely smooth, you can see it's a nice beveled curve. I'm going to set this back to 50. Now the segment offset setting here is a setting to which you can specify how much of the mesh of the path is being divided across the polygons. A setting of 1 is the smoothest look you can get, but if we move the slider all the way up to something like 100, the edge of the path becomes much more jagged. Now this could come useful as an optimization effort in being used in a game, for example, with roads. If you have a curve, you would more than likely set this to be very smooth, such as the value of 1. But if you have a straight road or a longer curved road that happens across a multiple distance, you may want to increase the segment distance or offset so your straight or long curves have less mesh affected. Because realistically in a game, you won't notice it that much. So it's a good method to balancing out the performance of your terrain if you use the path filter for path type things, such as roads. But the segment offset does have some nice control when using the path to creating a mountain or hill range, which we will actually cover in the next video, so stay tuned for that. But for this example, I'm just going to make sure our segment offset is all the way set to 1. So noise scale and noise factor kind of go hand in hand. I'm going to start off with noise factor first, off at a setting of 0.5. All right, so the noise factor is basically setting the noise strength and how much of the path it affects in terms of its width. You could see the jagged edges that were applied once I added the noise factor of 0.5. So to illustrate this, let's take this 0.5 and drag low. You can see the effect isn't so grand, and if we increase it above the half mark, you can see the noise effect is stretching the width of the path much more significantly. Let's add this back to about the middle point. So basically you can think of the noise factor as increasing or decreasing the intensity of the noise. Now on the other hand, the noise scale, for example, is taking whatever the noise factor is and it's scaling it, or in other terms, it's changing the density and size at which it will appear across the path linearly. So right now our noise is pretty dense. So let's widen out these noise values here to stretch across the entire path. So let's take our noise scale and lower it down. And I can't tell if you've noticed, but the concave and convex portions of this noise are being stretched across the whole terrain. Let's keep decreasing it. You can see it's getting more stretched and more stretched, almost to the point where it gets to be a beveled edge instead of a sharp edge. And 0 is no noise at all. Let's increase it back. You can see the noise is getting much more condensed. So a good thing to keep in mind is note that a higher scale means the noise factor is being compressed in a smaller area, while a lower scale means the noise factor is being stretched out along the entire path. These two settings also have a great effect on the outcome of the segment offset as well, so you could use those three in tandem. These settings will come in handy later on when we go over roads, rivers, and mountain ranges in the next video. But for right now, I'm just going to take this noise factor and slide it back to 0. Next, we have the closed checkbox here, and this basically just closes or connects the start and end points of our path. If I click this and zoom out a bit, you can see the start and end point of our path has been selected. So if we move this around over here, You can see that basically what this does is it creates a loop. But this could be handy if creating a ridge perimeter to a lake or volcanic crater, or even a trail loop around a hill or mountain. So you have some possibilities there, but I'm going to make sure this is selected to be off and move our node back up here the hill. Next, we have something that looks very familiar to us if you've watched my previous height map tutorials. That's the level step selection. For paths and shapes, at their essence, they are basically a height map filter being applied. And because of that, we have the ability to adjust how the path's detail is being placed or represented on the terrain. So the path is being inserted at level step 6. But I want to uncheck this checkbox just like we did in the part 2 video of our height maps tutorial, so I can adjust how the path reacts to the terrain per level step. So if we scroll all the way down, by default, all these are set to 1, so it's going to produce the most smooth level. And as we've learned in the past, since level step 10 is set to 1, it doesn't matter what the rest of these are, because that's the same thing as if we've changed use level step and changed it to 10. It produces almost the near same effect. So I'm going to drop this back down to 6, uncheck use level step, make all these down to 0 except 6, and now this is around the same effect that we were getting before when we had use level step level 6. But I want to go ahead and edit this curve just a little bit more by unchecking the use level step. And I'm just going to go ahead and change some of these values to some of the values that I've already come up with. Now I'm making these settings this way so I can create a decent road or dirt path that is believable, but still gives me some detail to work with when we go to adding things like erosion filters or textures. If it is something like a brand new paved road, we of course want very little detail to affect the path, and just let the normal or displacement map of the road's texture to do most of the work for us. Your mileage may vary on the results you get with the level strength steps, so feel free to make these settings whatever you need them to be. So for example, you can adjust the lower steps here instead of the higher steps a little bit, have the path width set to something extremely high, and make that path have some smooth noise effect going on so that you can generate a nice rolling hill. There are endless possibilities, just takes effort to investigate your results. Next up, we have the Has Mesh option here, which allows you to turn the path itself into physical mesh. This is something that is good to use if you're wanting to add a river that has an animation to it, or place a texture directly on the mesh itself. But this mesh doesn't account for the settings you set with the path itself. For example, you can see the mesh is not going along with the blending effects that we specified for the path. Also, if you're wanting to texture the path, there is a better way to go about this, and let's go ahead and do that now. So I would recommend for now, just turn off Has Mesh unless you have a specific use for it. So if you're wanting to add a texture to this path, the best way to do it is first we're going to hit Done Edit Path. We're going to go up to our areas icon up here. We're going to add area. We're going to set that area to fit the entire terrain. And under our blend properties here, we're going to select the filter and select our path filter. And then I want to select the border blend range to be full 100%, so it covers the entire terrain. And then what you have to do is you need to adjust the level steps so that your path has a full heat map that matches what your filter did. Now keep in mind, to get this blend map to match what the blend map of your path filter is, you're going to have to do a little bit of work. Right now I have use level steps set to 7, but I've gone back and under the path here, I've got the level step base at 6. If we uncheck this and use the settings that I created earlier, go back to areas and new area, you can see with these settings, I'm not getting the full painted effect on our blend map. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to use level steps, or not use the level step slider, and you're going to have to adjust all of these individually to get a more natural bleeded effect that covers the path more naturally. But for right now, I'm going to skip that because you should understand that method. And we're going to keep this at 7, even though this isn't fully covering our path. This is just to show you the method. Now, after we have our blend map the way we want, we're going to want to go over to our textures tab. So we're just going to go ahead and add a layer, add our texture. Let's just add the ground grass for a comparison's sake and some contrast. Now to add another texture on top of this path, we need to select a new layer. So let's add a new layer and then add a new texture for that layer. Let's just select our dirt path here, or our dirt texture. Then under the areas slot here, we're going to click and select the area that we specified before. And now you see our texture has been painted on the heat map that was generated by the area. So let's take a step back here. So if we go to that area, we can see what's highlighted in red is now what's being painted. And based on the filter, our path is telling the area where to paint. Like I said before, you're going to have to go into the areas and adjust it a little bit to get the areas blend map to match more on par with the paths blend map here. So if this doesn't have the effect you're after right now, because the devs are working really hard to fix bugs and bring new features and get everything the way we want, you can always hand paint this texture on this path. This is my preferred method right now anyways, as I like the flexibility and total control over my brush strokes. So to do that, we're going to go back to our areas tab. So if we want to customize this a little bit, we're going to click filter. And now that it has disregarded the filter box, then we're going to come down to edit blend, and then we can select a paintbrush, change its brush size. Too small. Then we can paint in over the area that we want the texture to be applied to. Then we go back and you can see that the texture is coming in more and more. So this is, like I said, my preferred method because it gives me total control over where we want our path. But we will go over this a little bit more in detail on the next video when we actually create a road. Now let's remove all this for now and go back to our path. So now that we're back under the path settings here, if you scroll down, you will see that our filter distribution properties are the same as any other filter distribution properties that you may have seen before. So these settings adjust the filter as a whole. So if you can have as many paths as you want that are listed here, just like they would in the layer system. You can have hundreds of them if you want. But keep in mind that if you have dozens and dozens of paths in this window, that's going to be applied to this path filters setting, which is derived by these filter settings. So if you want multiple paths to have different filter properties, different height selects, different slope ranges, different angles, different noise, different types of operations, you're going to have to make a new path filter individually for that. So keep that in mind going forward. Let's change pace real quick and do our shape filter. So I'm going to uncheck our path here. I'm going to add a layer. I'm going to select that layer, add filter, and select our shape filter, and OK. And just like with the path filter, we need to go down here and add the shape. And we can edit the shape. And you can see our default square has been added. And just like the path filter, we can also add as many spheres as we want on the shape filter. And to do that, if you hover the mouse in the middle between two nodes, you will see a dark sphere appear. Once that dark sphere appears, all you have to do is just click on it. And it'll add more spheres. And to remove any sphere, just do what the command line here says. Left Alt Shift and click, and it'll remove that node. Let's just add it back. And also, just like the path filter, we can select a node and move it around anywhere we want. But there is one big difference you may or may not have noticed. The arrows that were on the path filter aren't here for the shape filter. That's because the shape filter, we cannot adjust the nodes vertically, and of course we can't adjust them horizontally because they're not a width thing. So the shape, wherever you click doesn't matter what the z-axis is on the terrain. If you add a new node, it's going to be the same z value as the rest of the nodes. So for the shape filter, if you're wanting to change the z value, you're going to have to change the height offset, and that will change them all together. I hope in a later update that we could select each one of these nodes and control their z-axis independently, because that could create some interesting shapes with our terrain. And just like the path filter, we have some very similar settings, such as the strength of the shape, on how much it affects the underlying terrain. And just like the path filter as well, we can also adjust the smoothness of the shape, so it adjusts the border blending between the center of the shape's mass and the border of the shape, just like with the areas and the path filter. You can see the center of that shape is now getting blended even more so, and it's sharper at the lower values. And the last thing we can do with the shape filter, which is just like the path filter, is we can adjust this shape based on each individual level step down at the bottom. But keep in mind that when adjusting the individual level strengths here, that the detail will mostly be seen in the gradient between the center part of the mass and the border. This light gradient right here, that's what's going to be affected the most with the detail for the filter, since the shape filter as a whole makes a flat surface. The detail isn't going to affect the most red part of the shape. But if you want the filter level strength sliders to affect the center part of the shape, you're going to have to scroll up and decrease the overall strength value. So if we decrease the strength to something like 50, and then you go to adjust these settings. So let's use the level strength step slider here. If you want to adjust the center part of the shape, then you'll have to adjust the level strength sliders after you have lowered the overall strength. So you can see as I move the strength slider along here, the level step slider along here, it has a different effect on each step. And that's only when the strength is something lower than 1. Remember, if this is set to 1, this level strength step slider is only going to affect the gradient. And I've skipped ahead and gone and made sure my strength was set something really low. And I've adjusted some overall level strength sliders here to get this effect. And I've adjusted the nodes a little bit, as well as adjusted the smoothness a tad. And you can see that in general, you can just use the shape filter to shape, no pun intended, the terrain around to get a particular look that you're after without having to worry about the custom base shape nodes in the very beginning. So you have lots of options to stack. You can even stack all these shape filters to create an interesting effect. So much like the path filter, we can also apply a texture to this shape using the same method by adding an area and setting that area to match up with the shape, adjusting the level strength steps to fill in the blended part of our shape here, and adding whatever texture you want on top of it. You just have to adjust some settings like we went over in the path filter. There are several uses for this shape filter, such as creating man-made fields, lakes, even building pads or flat areas for towns and cities, even using it just as a patch to level off an area subtly so it isn't too high, just like I have an example here. I did this, I adjusted this shape settings to lower the terrain in a particular pattern or shape that I wanted it to be without changing the whole terrain too much. You can even use it to specify an area for certain filters or mountainous areas, or even combine several shapes, like I mentioned before, to create a unique terraced effect apart from the terraced filter. I will be sure to go over in later videos of some ideas that we could incorporate the path and shape filter to get a different effect of what we're after for that video's topic. Now that we've covered the basics to understanding the path and shape filters, in the next video we are going to put our skills to the test by creating a landscape using the two filter types, focusing most of our attention on creating a road and rolling hills. It should be pretty interesting, and I hope to see you then. So, till then, I'll see you in the next one.